friend, and my once co-author John Chancellor was grabbed by the cops in San Francisco and kept reporting and said, "This is John Chancellor somewhere in custody." You know, that stuff, it doesn't give you a television studio, but it gives you, I think, a lot better live television than where we're at now. I mean, one other thing that I didn't mention in response to Jay that's changed the mix is the change in the party rules. The fact that Hubert Humphrey in 1968 was the last nominee ever to be nominated now or forever without winning the delegates for the nomination in the primaries. In 1972, a majority of the Democratic delegates were selected by primary. The decisions made. I mean, Kerry's last major nationwide speech was on Super Tuesday, the night he won the nomination. He gave a long, essentially, acceptance address after winning enough delegates to be nominated way back in March. So we've known the two tickets ever since then, or the two nominees, 1.5 tickets, and there used to be an effort to manufacture suspense around the vice presidential choice, but now the custom has become to choose the vice president in advance. People who have read my book say to me is, I read your book, I really liked it. Which side are you on?
How can we trust you in your blog if you don't know who you're supporting?
How can you trust me if you do know?
We'll be able to compensate for your beliefs.
You don't have to compensate for my beliefs. I'm objective. No, I mean, for a professional political reporter, who you like and who you support personally, who are you going to vote for? I don't know. It's not. I guess it's in part ethics. It's also in part the fact that that's the way you make your living, and so the good ones learn to be dispassionate and straight, and I hope that that's what I managed to do. I mean, I like Barry Goldwater. I wouldn't have voted for him in a million years, but Barry Goldwater was my friend until he died. Nobody knew that, or knew, my politics on that. Goldwater once said to half a dozen of us who had covered him for a long time, right after the election, I know most of you disagreed with me, but you didn't let it show, and you were fair to me. These are the straight news guys, and I took that as a great compliment.
I'm just going to ask for one more question.
Okay.
You said you had to do that.
Yeah, I got to go blog. Yes.
That objectivity, does it have anything to do with maintaining your access to powerful people?
No. That's not the way. That's not the way you do your job. Think of it, work at it. I suppose that if you're really cozy with a politician, you might get a bit more access than somebody who is obviously somebody who's clearly opposed, or somebody who's objective and they don't know. But it doesn't work that way.
Reports about the White House, for instance, kind of punishing journalists who ask questions, or the White House press corps needs access.
Covering the White House, which is a job I never wanted or took. I spent about 6 months over there right after Nixon's election because I covered the campaign and knew all the people pretty well and could get stuff. But if you're covering the White House, you're covering a man who is in absolute isolation booth under armed guard. You can't get near him unless they say you can come near me. You can't get people to answer your phone calls, particularly in this administration, unless they're all vetted and you're cleared and they say, okay, now you can talk to whoever. It's a very difficult place to cover, and it's a very programmed place. Always has been, but never so much and so stringently as it is in the current administration. A schedule. Pay less attention to the fact that there are going to be some set speeches at 4 o'clock and so forth, and much more to the state caucuses. I think you know, going to an Ohio caucus, for example, might give you a feel that for a very important swing state that you're not going to get otherwise, unless you go to Ohio and spend a week or a month. But that's where I think the grist is. I think it's off the floor, away from the spotlight, and with the delegates at their hotels as they interact. And it's also fun. I mean, some of the great political, the great John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson confrontation in 1960 was at a state caucus. It wasn't in the convention hall. This was before, obviously, Johnson became president. So that would be my advice. But actually, I should be getting advice from you guys instead. Listen, thank you all very much for.
Who was kind enough to drop by. It makes it very easy for me when I don't have to introduce people because they're so well known, and this is certainly someone who's very well known in the blogging community, Governor Dean.
First of all, I get to give a different speech than I did to all your delegations. Secondly, I feel somewhat responsible for the fact that everybody got credentials, and I really think this is great. Let me just say a couple of things about why I think this meeting is maybe one of the most important I'm going to talk to. Many people give us credit for kind of revolutionizing the use of the internet during the campaign. The truth is that John McCain had some success raising money in the 2000 cycle over the net. We were able to amplify on that a lot. And John Kerry's been able to amplify on that since. The truth is that all campaigns have blogs now, even the dreaded right-wing campaign at the president. But one of the things I think that other campaigns still have to learn is that what you are doing is not just about communicating. It's about creating a community. And that's the one innovation that we did in the Dean campaign that has not yet been copied by anybody else. People have learned how to raise money. They've learned how to communicate. They've learned how they've learned how to raise money. They've learned how to get their message out. But they haven't yet understood that what we've created here is a real community. So the communication has to be two-way. That I read blogs from time to time. Not usually because I sit down and intend to, because I don't have that much time, but supporters send me stuff on the emails from various blogs that they read, and I'll sometimes tune in by just getting on their blog site, or else they'll just send me snippets of it. It's an incredible way directly to communicate with a candidate about what's going on around the country in the communities that the blogs represent, or with my own folks. What we discovered after our campaign stopped on February 18th, while we were resurrecting it in sort of the form of democracy for America and broadening its reach substantially, is that the relationship that we had created in our campaign was different than what most people understood. And it came from what we first started to do. We first started our campaign, we had no money, no name recognition, no nothing. And so we had local groups around the country who were going to meetups, deciding what their strategy was going to be in their area, and just going to do it without even bothering to ask us if that was all right or not. We had people in the Bay Area leading farmers markets every single Sunday for an entire summer before we ran it. It wasn't a big surprise to me that we were leaving the California polls pretty early. And we had nothing to do with that. That wasn't our idea. That was their idea. We just empowered them to do it. Blogs the same way. And so when Joe Trippi came and took over and realized what we had, because he knew a lot about the internet, he was able to extend the way that we worked with communities to the blog and the internet community. So for us, it was the same idea as letting the people in the Bay Area do whatever they wanted. We encouraged blogs to talk among themselves, create their own strategy, and it was a two-way communication. What I discovered after we dropped out, we were trying to put together democracyforamerica.com, for those of you who want to put that in blue on your blog. When we created Democracy for America, what I also discovered is it really is a two-way street. That is, this wasn't just a group of people who wanted to go do their own thing and let us know about it afterwards. They also wanted direction. The biggest complaint that we had while we were trying to transition from Dean for America to Democracy for America was that our people out there, not just in the blog but in the meetups, were saying, we don't have enough to do, tell us what you want us to do. That was a big surprise to me. And then I realized, of course, that in a presidential campaign, everybody knows what the goal is, so you don't have to kind of empower people and tell people what they need to do. So that was what really tipped me off to the notion of what we had created, without my really understanding it, was a two-way communication with voters. We have not seen that for a long time in this country. Even the whistle stops, I was just rereading Harry Truman's biography by David McCullough a couple of days ago about the 1948 campaign. Even the whistle stops, the person-to-person contact, was not the same as being able to actually talk to people. It's been a long time, long time, since presidential candidates have actually been able to sit down and talk and listen to ordinary people outside the confines of focus groups. So I know you probably know that. I'll take some Q&A unless that's going to disrupt your entire schedule, because I've talked about what I wanted to talk about. But this isn't just a big rah-rah for the speeches. If you want to cover those, you're welcome to come to the delegation meetings and hear the more traditional stuff. I just appreciate that you're here. I take some pride because I think we had something to do with getting you here, not that we planned it, but that we moved communication forward. But I think the critical lesson has not yet been learned. And we didn't set out to do it. I don't take great pride of ownership. This was an accident. All we did was empower people to talk to us by listening to them. And because of this extraordinary medium that you're all using now, it is now possible to have people directly communicate. Even emails don't work. Because emails, we get 4,000 of them a day. Obviously, you're not going to run through every email. Blogs do work because it's a living discussion among communities that you get to tap into and read and figure out what goes on, at least in those particular communities. And if you have we have great ones. I mean, we have one of my favorites is Punks for Need, run by Kimmy Cash, who some of you may know. But obviously, the Daily Cost, the ones, the larger ones. But there are lots of them, and we can find out what's going on in a given community simply by looking at 10 or 20 entries. And of course, we read ours religiously. The first people we hired when we started Democracy for America were bloggers. We got ourselves down from a staff of about 600 to about 12. And the two first new hires were bloggers. So that gives you some idea of what the stake that we put in what kind of stake we put in two-way communication. I think that's going to be the campaign. In some ways, it's the most innovative thing that came out of our campaign, more so than the money, which the press always writes about, and the ways of sending out your message to avoid the press, which I, of course, thoroughly approve of. But the biggest innovation is yet to be copied and yet to be written about, and that is the nature of the community that was created, the two-way communication, the direct contact, not just with the voters, but from the voters. Yes?
You used the blog to go after, to respond to CNN and Fox when they were running the Scream speech.
Why we what?
Why didn't you use the blog to communicate with voters? Your blog was silent in that period. You didn't say anything to anybody. They killed your campaign at that moment.
Well, I don't think that's true, actually. I think our campaign was lost when we came in third in Iowa. Whoever won Iowa was going to win the speech. I never thought that the Scream speech was that big a deal.
No, it wasn't, because we heard it, right? And you heard it from their point, from the CNN point of view. It sounded like you were like out in left field, but you heard
Right.
it from the point of view from the audience, and you were just screaming to get over the din in the room, right? Why didn't that come? Why didn't you use your blog? You had the medium in which to say these people are screwing us. Why not say it?
That's a very interesting question. There's probably multiple parts of the answer to that. One of them is we were working so hard to try to see if we could catch on back in New Hampshire. We didn't have time for all that, and everybody said it was all hands on deck and all that stuff. The other thing is the odd way that I think about the media. I think the media is kind of the last people to figure, the mainstream media are basically the last people to figure out what's going on in America. They're closely behind the people in Washington. And so I don't pay much attention to what goes on in the media. I never saw the Scream speech, I think, until after the campaign was over. And I didn't think it was all that bad, and most people I know didn't think it was all that bad. So it never occurred to me this was going to be a big problem. And to this day, I still don't think it was all that big a problem. We lost the race because of things didn't go well in Iowa for us, and John Kerry won. And we believed from the beginning that whoever won Iowa was going to win the whole thing. I know a lot of our folks were saying, how could you spend $9 million in Iowa? Where did all the money go? It went because we knew if we didn't win Iowa that we weren't going to win. And if we did win Iowa, we knew we were going to win the whole thing. So we didn't use the blog. Maybe we should have used the blog. I don't know that it would have done made a big difference or not, but I don't think it would have changed who John got the nomination. We'll go here.
First of all, thank you for coming,
Yeah.
and I think you do have something to do with this breakfast and this
one-way campaigns and two-way communication. And that was a big part of what was happening in 2003 all the way up through the spring of this year. So my question now is who doesn't want two-way communication in the campaign process? Who is not only not for, but who's threatened by that, or who doesn't get it? Because I don't think it's so simple as saying, let's hear from the voters. Everybody will give lip service to that. But two-way communication really is a whole different way of electing a president. It's a whole different way of running a campaign. So who are the people who don't want it?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of who doesn't want it. I can name those people, and I'm going to. But I think this is kind of a technological. Here's why it hasn't been adopted. It's not that people don't want it. It's that politics is a traditional game, and most politicians, the vast majority, are just like business people or doctors or anybody else. They fight the last war instead of the next war. So in order to create a campaign that's really a two-way campaign, you can't just do the technological things. The technological things are relatively easy to do, and all the other candidates, including George Bush, have done these things. More money, blogs, so forth and so on. It's the cognitive changes that need to be made in the business that are much harder, and that's why you haven't seen the adoption. So it's not people who don't want it done, although there are some, and as I promised, I'm about to name them. But it's that the institution, human nature is not to embrace great change. Entrepreneurs do that. Far-sighted people do that. We frankly fell into it by being willing to listen to we didn't think of this. We fell into it by watching technological innovations and saying, aha, this is something we ought to embrace. We didn't invent it. But we were willing to embrace it because we were a campaign that had to embrace things like that, because I started out with nothing. Now, so I think the failure to absorb that particular lesson has to do with how hard it is to get human beings to make the cognitive changes. And a lot of it is also about giving up control. Politicians don't like to give up control. Believe me, I did not like giving up control. I had no choice, and once we started doing it, I said, hey, this isn't bad. 90% of the judgments that get made by people around the country who don't know anything about politics are absolutely solid. And if I had batting average, I wouldn't be here. I'd be, throwing out the Red Sox ball, and you'd be talking to somebody else. So, now, there are people who don't want this. Guess what? They don't have any say. I mean, there's the Rupert Murdochs and the CNNs and the NBCs and the New York Times of the world, because they're out of business. When this happens, 50% of people under 25 years old get their news from the Daily Show and from the net. Now, those people are going to get to be 50 years old 25 years from now. Guess what's going to happen? A lot of media organizations are going to be forced to change and figure out how to do this. A lot of politicians, in the next cycle, you're going to see that people will adopt this two-way community if they're smart. Somebody's going to figure this out besides us, and they're going to do it. In fact, hopefully, as a result of this breakfast, somebody's going to figure this out and go, aha. We want those people to be the grassroots folks, and it usually is going to percolate up until the presidential campaign starts doing it on a regular basis.
Have you talked to the presumptive candidate or anybody in the campaign about the utilization of the web for more than just raising money?
I can't answer that question. The reason I don't is John and I have a very good relationship. We've come to like each other a lot since the campaign was over, and I am in the privileged position of giving him advice from time to time, which he solicits, and I've quickly discovered that if you give anybody advice publicly, you won't be doing it privately very long. So I'm not going to answer about what I may or may not have told the Kerry campaign, but I am trying to do everything I can to support them, and certainly discussions like this might be something we might have undertaken. Yes.
Do you see bloggers as being real journalists, as a lot of people at this convention have said we're not, or do you see them more as a vehicle to open that communication, that two-way conversation that you were discussing?
If I were you, I would not be insulted if somebody refused to call you a real journalist. I'm actually quite sorry. I don't need to be catty about the press, but the truth is that real journalists are in a terrible bind. Their business has become the business of entertainment, not news, so you can't do worse. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I really don't. I don't think the media cost me the election or any of that kind of stuff. I really don't. We made plenty of mistakes to cost us the primary in Iowa without having to blame the media or somebody else. But I think there's going to be a new kind of journalism, and what you do has a lot to do with it. If you pick up, I read bunch of daily papers. I read a paper that I used to like a lot, and but I still read it every day. And I noticed on the front page of an incredibly prestigious paper in this country that every single article was an opinion piece. They weren't named that, they weren't labeled that way, but you know, you get into the third paragraph, and if Senator Kerry does this or does that, then this is likely to happen, and something else, then this is likely to happen. That is somebody's opinion. That's not news. But was there a news analysis or opinion piece label? No. It didn't matter whether the subject was politics or foreign affairs. Every single piece was opinion. What's happened is, under the influence of Rupert Murdoch, not because he's a right-winger, and not because Fair and Balanced is a farce, which it is, because he's so good at what he does, and because he is partisan and has got snappy graphics, the rest of the American media has become more entertainment-oriented and less news-oriented. So my attitude towards bloggers is, why not? Who says that you're any less qualified to deliver the news, as long as people understand what it is? We're creating an entire new generation of Americans. Everybody here went through civics class in high school, right? Remember the civics lesson that we're not trying to tell you what to do, we're trying to get you to think critically, so that you can analyze. We're not going to give you our version of history. We want to create in you the kind of analytical skills that allow you to look at things and then decide for yourself. Well, guess what? We're about to have a national experience to find out if that really works or not. Because if people under 25 get their news from the Daily Show and the internet, that means they think that the New York Times, the front page, is no more credible than the ravings of a conspiracy lunatic on the conspiracy theorist on the internet. They have to use their critical facilities to find out what they think of all this stuff. And they do what we've always hoped voters would do, synthesize in a country which has the freest press in the world. They look at everybody's point of view, and then they synthesize it based on their own experience and decide what for them is true. So why are bloggers worse than reporters, quote unquote reporters? I think you are reporters. You don't put any more or less of a point of view than anybody else does. My God, have you read what's in the New York Post half the time? I mean, why, you know, if that passes a daily newspaper of some seriousness, I think half the people in this, well, I wouldn't insult you, but I think 99% of the people in this room will do better than that. Yeah, the barn sweater, then we're going to move in front of you.
I'm a public librarian in Vermont, and we have a lot of people in at least my region and a lot of the state that have this whole internet thing is a bit of a total mystery to them, and blogs are an extra total mystery. And when I start talking about it at my job, people look at me as if I'm some sort of smarty pants that's basically moving on and leaving them behind. And I was just sort of wondering what your perspective is on bringing people that are sort of in technological shadows, both in rural communities and just not wired communities, into this new blog idea without seeming like you're running away from them.
You have to be patient, and you have to not appear to be a smarty pants. And I'm not saying that you are, but I mean, we wired every school in the state when I was there. We made a phone company that would put broadband in every school in the state in exchange for some nice regulatory treatment that we helped them with. Well, you got to do those things. I mean, it was either that or the taxpayers do it, and they were never going to do it. So if you want the place wired, you got to do a quick probe over the phone company, and that's what we did. And it's very much in rural states like Vermont or other states, Iowa and so forth. What happens is there's a digital divide, just like there is in the African American and Latino community. But guess what? Those divides are getting smaller and smaller because kids are learning. It used to be that there was a huge digital divide with minority folks in this country. That's much smaller now because now even the poorest schools, many of them are now wired. And so poor kids and minority kids are now learning the internet in school early on, and they're facile with computers and they're comfortable with them. It's not a lot different than when driving came along 100 years ago. You know, people like my great-grandmother saw this car and were terrified of it and swore never to get into it. But kids accepted it as part of their lives because they grew up with it. So now, I don't advocate that we just wait till everybody gets older who's familiar with the internet and that'll solve the problem. But I think patience, education, and learning from your kids and encouraging people to learn from your children is a very good way to do it. And that applies not just in rural areas, it applies in inner city areas as well. Yes.
Now that Kerry has essentially taken your idea of raising money for his campaign by getting millions of people to give small donations, it seems that more people, more regular grassroots folks are funding his campaign than corporate interests.
That's just exactly what we want. This is campaign finance reform.
Is that going to affect how he governs? Is
I think
he listening more to us than to...
Absolutely, yes. I think it will, and I'm not even sure if he knows it, because that's a conversation I've never had with him. But it affected the way I thought enormously. I mean, it probably went to my detriment. I never worried about what the corporate fat cats in Washington were going to say when I was campaigning. I knew as long as I was consistent with what the American people wanted, then it would be fine to say it because my donations weren't getting cut off. So they probably didn't have the ability to influence the campaign in other ways, such as showing the scream speech 937 times without the sound of the crowd. But the truth is, it does change the way. Now, I'm a political guy, right? I've been in politics for 20 years, so even though I wouldn't say I was a typical politician, I certainly think, as a sitting governor for almost 12 years, in political ways. I can tell you that during the campaign, I never thought about whose interest I was going to defend. Because I didn't have to. Because I wasn't dependent at all on big check writers. We got a lot of big checks after everybody thought I was going to win. Most of the big checks we raised were after people thought I was going to win. But when we were running and still leading the pack and raising more money than anybody else from small donations, it is incredibly empowering for a candidate not to have to do that. It is, in some ways, it's better than public finance. And the reason in some ways it's better is because people feel empowered by giving you money. I never understood that. I used to feel so bad. I had this story, which I'm going to tell tomorrow night, about a woman who was on disability who gave me $50 worth of quarters in a bag in Iowa and said, I've been saving this for 2 years. She was on disability, SSI. She has been saving this for 2 years, and now I finally found something that's worth doing with this money. I just was blown away. To this day, I can hardly tell the story without being emotional about it. And I realized after many times of this kind of stuff, that actually you empower people. When somebody does that, they are empowering themselves, like giving money to church. If you believe, you are furthering something that you really believe in. So that these kinds of small contributions are not just about cleaning up the corporate influence in campaigns, it's about giving people hope that a small act on their part will cascade and multiply and give people the opportunity to participate again in the democracy that's rapidly going downhill after the farces of the 2000 Supreme Court decision in the election.
You talked about two-way communications, and I think there's something I didn't hear you say, but way back, end of 2002, early 2003, it was obvious to us that people in your campaign were reading the weblog.
Mm-hmm.
I think that brought you a kind of a leading edge feel
Absolutely right.
That
is absolutely right.
For opinions that weren't yet salient.
That's absolutely right.
And
I still do that to this
part of
day.
that process.
I still do that to this day. I give a lot of people my email address, the Democracy for America one, and they send me snippets of blogs. Even though and we have two people who we pay to read 25 or whatever it is blogs a day. Obviously nobody can read every last word of every blog. They're enormous and they can go on for a long time, as you're well aware. But just going through those once a week helps me enormously find the ideas that the American people have before everybody else figures out what they are. I said I'd go over here and then I'll go over there.
Thanks.
Somebody's going to yank me out of here when we start getting.
We get time for like
next
2 more questions.
2 more questions?
Two,
Okay.
three more.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it really quick. First, I just wanted to thank you. I was a volunteer in the DNC campaign, and I was
Thank
not a
you.
registered Democrat until that was independent over the whatever. So I took sides. I just want to follow up a little bit on the thing about fundraising, because I know that there's a lot of clean money campaigns. There's Arizona, there's one in Berkeley, there's a couple other statewide ones. And and you sort of suggested that perhaps large, widespread small donations might actually be superior than publicly funded campaigns.
Well, but we're vigorously trying to prevent the rollback of clean elections in Arizona, because good campaign finance reform actually does require people to give small donations. We actually have a great campaign finance law in my state, which has pretty much been suspended because we tried to push the envelope and get rid of Buckley and Vallejo, and we knew it would take a long time. We're challenging that in court. But what we do is I think we require 1,500, which is a fair number in a small state, of people give at least $5. So if you construct your public finance bill where people do have to give small donations to validate the candidate, that's the best of both worlds. You're doing the public financing, getting big money out, but you're also requiring that, or enabling in some ways, is a better word, even though it's a requirement too, enabling people to empower candidates of their choosing by requiring a certain number of donations to show that you have widespread support. So you can't just wake up in the morning and say, I think I'll run for governor, and go down and sign up and get $100,000. We're going to go in the back and then over here.
My question was about the strategy of using blogs and the internet as a campaign tool.
I said we had 800 people running for local offices around the country. Those came out of the meetups. So your supposition is well founded. You know, we're not going to raise $53 million in Democracy for America because I'm not on the tube all the time, and people aren't reminded to go, oh yeah, I should give that guy some money. That's great. But what we're doing, what we've done for the last few months is had these 12 candidates every 2 weeks. The dean doesn't, and they're roughly 72 or 80, or I don't know exactly how many we've had now. Maybe it's up to 96. And they're interesting local candidates. What we're now doing, since we have 800 candidates, is August 23rd will be the last day that we put out a dean dozen. We're transitioning to create the ability of local groups, because there's a version of Democracy for America in every state, and about 30 of them are really active. So local groups are going to come up with their own local Democracy dozen, or whatever they want to call them. So we'll expand the number. So it's not exactly a mirror of the presidential campaign, but when you push this down to the local level, you can use the same tools. But since local small candidates for school boards are not in the paper every day, you've got to introduce them in a virtual community. Then you build the grassroots groups of people who need to go out and knock on the doors. And you create the ability on blogs to get their recognition. The other piece of this is that when you're doing this nationally, you have to use a virtual community, because it's impossible for me to be at every meetup. We had 850 of them at the height of the campaign. But locally, you can bring people together. You can get them together on the net, and then they're close enough. If a school board district's pretty small. So you get them together on the net when they've never heard of each other. You bring them to a place and do a meetup. They get to meet each other, and now you have a campaign organization. And that's exactly how it's worked. Last one.
In terms of facilitating this two-way communication that you've talked about, what policy change in Washington could help or hinder the most, whether it's spectrum reform or copyright or media ownership? What issue or issues other than those would be most important or could potentially undermine the move towards this?
Other than regulation of the internet, I can't think of anything that's going to undermine this. And so, I during the campaign talked about the enormous concentration of corporate power which controls the media today, and how that ought to be changed. We got to go back to equal time and all that. In theory, it doesn't matter if you do that or not, because in theory, the net over the next 25 years ought to be so ubiquitous around the country that you can bypass the mainstream media entirely. However, I still think we need, local news does provide an enormous service to the community. And I really do think we need to have real local news again. It means not having Clear Channel buy up every station in your town, because they don't do local news anymore. It's rip and read at the best from the AP wire. I think we have one or maybe two local news shows in the whole state of Vermont now. That's it. It's pretty radio. It's pretty awful, the whole state like that. We have 9 daily newspapers, which in a state of 600,000 people is pretty extraordinary. I always liked Vermont. I think they had about 30 daily newspapers in the state of Iowa. It's an extraordinary thing in a state of 3 million people. That kind of thing is going by the board. So I think we need to go back to the old ways of limiting media ownership to no more than one major outlet in a particular market, limiting penetration. I also think we ought to go back to the equal time doctrine. I thought it was a disgrace to have the Dixie Chicks kicked off Cumulus because they voiced an opinion that wasn't the opinion of the management. That kind of stuff is, the airwaves belong to the American people, and I think people in Congress forget that, and that needs to be a crusade I think that we need to go on throughout these campaigns and talk about that issue, because most people agree with us in this country. That's a good place to end. Thanks very much.
We're going to let you all go, but I want to say one more thing. Thank you to the governor for giving us so much time. He's certainly played an integral role in having bloggers here. And I also mentioned thanking Rod O'Connor and the people at the convention. There's someone else that I'd be remiss. Dick Bell and Peter Rauer here from John Kerry's campaign and blogging for them. And the way these conventions work, when we, wherever the idea came from, let's credential bloggers. came from. They wouldn't be here unless the candidates' campaign said, that's a good idea. And Governor Dean mentioned that they get it, but John Kerry gets it. And I think that's absolutely right. And we wouldn't be here without the Kerry campaign saying, let's bring the bloggers in. And I think that's an important point because one of the questions I get from the traditional media when they're asking about the credentialing bloggers, they're like, are you worried that these guys are independent voices? Are you worried that they're unfiltered and not edited? And I'm like, we're not worried. We're not worried because we have a great candidate and a great message. And so go at it, enjoy these next 4 days. I know I really look forward to reading your posts, and thank you for coming this morning.
Right here?
Yeah, that was a good, very good to have you.
Excuse me. Dave? Hi, Steve Garfield. Hey, how's it going? Big fan. Right, cool. What you thought about it?
All right, I thought overall the blogger breakfast was pretty exciting, and we had a lot of big names come here. Barack Obama was here, Howard Dean, one guy who's sort of the up-and-comer of the Democratic Party, and another guy who probably had as much as anyone to do with the rise of the blog as a political tool, because he really validated it with his own campaign. So I thought it was pretty exciting. It's also pretty funny to see how many journalists are here covering the blogs and bloggers, which is not that surprising. It's still pretty fun and sort of funny also.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Hey, this is Steve Garfield, and here we are at the special exclusive blogger breakfast, which I wasn't invited to, but I got in as media covering the bloggers blogging bloggers, as it were, and a surprise speaker that we didn't know about was Howard Dean, and he gave a great speech. And after his speech, we got to talk with Dave Pell, another blogger I've known on the internet, and it was great to meet him. So let's check out some more of the bloggers here. And this is Steve Garfield reporting for stevegarfield.com. We could take a picture of each other. Who are you?
My name is Andres Seriel. I'm working for Youth Radio Television in Berkeley.
Great, thanks.
That's great. I love what you're doing.
Tell me your thoughts on the blogger breakfast.
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, Walter Mears was a statesman-like journalist, likes to think of himself as a blogger, but I don't think so. But he seems like a smart guy, and he's trying something new, and I think I support that. Always a good idea for people to try something new. David Weinberger asked the right question. He asked him, who are you going to vote for? And so he gave him the spiel about how, well, you know, I never tell anybody. I'm objective, which is, I don't, you know, I mean, that's very different from the blogger's ethos. The blogger's ethos, it doesn't say you're objective. It says you're independent, and to the extent that you're not independent, you tell them, you know, what your conflicts of interest are. So that was very interesting. I thought you're going to ask me about Governor Dean?
What I want to ask you about Governor Dean is, do you think he gets it or doesn't get it that the internet could have helped him refute that scream speech?
Well, now you're going to find out that I'm not a politician, okay? No, Governor Dean doesn't get it. Governor Dean did some very good things, and he helped the blogging world out. I think that at a very, very deep level, he does get it, in the sense that what we're applying here are the principles of democracy, the principles of the United States. How blogs achieve that is not something that he is very immersed in. You know, there were a lot of things that he said that made it pretty clear that was true. And but on the other hand, he's a pioneer, and you know, and there's no question that there was a lot of gratitude, a lot of warm feeling for him here in this room today. You know, and I felt it as well. I saw him campaign a lot. You know, at Harvard we went to go see candidates campaigning in New Hampshire, and we went to see Dean the most often. He was an interesting candidate. He's still an interesting guy in the context, but no, blogs are not yet his thing.
And do you want to say anything to Adam Curry on his critique of your morning coffee note?
Yeah, I was thrilled. I mean, Adam is the consummate professional at this stuff, and he gets it. I mean, Adam gets it in a way that he's one of my teachers. So there's no higher praise possible. To say that I would be fired from a radio station, Adam, right on. Fire me right away, and that he thought it was beautiful. That's inspirational to me. I'm going to keep trying to do more of that. So did you listen to it?
I didn't listen to it yet. I was rushing out to get to here.
Okay, good. But you will listen to it,
I
won't
will.
you? Okay, excellent.
Thanks a lot.
I won't watch.
Okay, so that wraps it up from the Hilton Hotel, and this is Steve Garfield, who's reported and blogged the official convention bloggers, and now, even though I'm not a official convention blogger and a credentialed blogger, I got the credentialed blogger's special little hat, so I'm excited about that. Again, Steve Garfield reporting for stevegarfield.com.
demonstration. We got people all over the country running, walking, jogging, showing their displeasure with the administration. Here at the convention, we're running every morning at 10:30 from all the major hotels. We got a rally and run tomorrow night.
Oh, really? Okay, great. Thank you.
Come out and join us.
All right, thanks.